I realize that some folks might be joining us a little bit late. This is a very busy time for teachers and school leaders in their buildings. So definitely we thank you for being here today. This is the third quarter meeting for the Principal Advisory Council. We will be here today until about noon. Dr. Glass will be joining us in just a little bit. He is in between meetings. He has meetings all day today. So at about 10:15, he will likely be able to join us just for a few minutes to talk to you and to find out if you have any comments or questions to share with him. If not, we do have associate commissioners and our deputy commissioner who's also on our meeting today, who if it happens that Dr. Glass is not able to join, then for sure your questions and comments can be shared and will be shared with Dr. Glass.
Absolutely.
So let's begin just by taking roll call for those who are on the meeting right now, and we'll just go in the order that appears on your screen. So we'll start with Kevin. Kevin, if you are on, if you would unmute yourself, share your video if you can, and just a quick introduction.
Hello, I'm Kevin Cook. I'm here. Excited to be here again today.
Thank you. Michelle?
Hello, Michelle Curtis from Prairie Central High School. I'm here.
Thank you. Byron? Wait just a moment to make sure that Byron is not with us yet. Okay, let's move on to Lester. Are you here? Melanie? Tamala?
I'm here, Tamala Howard from Union County, principal at Uniontown Elementary School.
Welcome, Tamala. Jennifer, actually, I just received a message from her this morning and she is unable to join us this morning. Brian, are you here? Brian? Michael Kelly?
I am here, Mike Kelly from Valley High School in Jefferson County.
Thanks, Mike. Dr. Robert King, I received a message from him this morning as well, but he was going to be unable to join us. Darla, are you here this morning? Lisa Purdue.
Hello, Lisa Purdue here from Cumberland County Elementary.
Thanks, Lisa. Kim Rice.
Hi, it's Kim Rice from the Academy of Shawnee here in Jefferson County. I'm here.
Thank you, Kim. Toya.
Good morning from KSD. I'm here.
Peggy.
Hi, good morning. I'm Peggy Sinclair Morris from the Kentucky School for the Blind.
Good morning. And Sharvita. Okay. We will move on. So at this time, we need to approve the summary from our December 8th, 2020, our second quarter meeting. So that was attached to the email that you had in your calendar request as well. If you would bring that up, look that over, and we just need to have an approval of the second quarter summary of minutes. Just take a moment for you to review those, and then once you have reviewed, let's just wait a minute or so. Once you've had time for everyone to review, then I will just need a motion to accept, and if you would unmute, announce your name, and then move to accept.
I make a motion to accept the December 8th, 2020 summary minutes. Kim Rice.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you so much. And then if there could also be a second.
Michelle Ritchie for a second. / Curtis.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. And then all in favor, if you would just please type approve in the chat feature, and we'll make sure that we have consensus. Also, as we do at every meeting, if you would please use the digital sign-in so that we have record of your attendance today. If you just go ahead and access it by clicking on the provided link. Paul, if you wouldn't mind putting that link in the chat feature, or even I can.
I'll grab it real quick, Jenny.
Okay, thank you. Choose March 16th. And you'll notice that also on this link, there is an option for you to put in your address, whichever your preferred address is, either for your school or your home address. We have several members who are rotating off after the June meeting that we have on June 22nd. And so we want to make sure to mail you your thank you letter and certificate of participation and your service. So we will do a send off for that at our June meeting as well. Okay, so at this time, we will go ahead and begin with the regulation updates. We have 2 regulations that are going to be, you're going to receive some information about those, one involving the Site-Based Decision-Making Council and one around the school, the Comprehensive School Improvement Plan, as well as the Comprehensive District Improvement Plans information. So at this time, I will introduce Matthew Courtney. Matt, I will stop sharing if you or whoever is going to be sharing your slide decks. You can go ahead and share those, but if you would like for me to continue sharing my screen and the slide deck, I can do that as well.
I'm happy to, if that's easier for you.
Okay, that's fine. It might be easier for you, so you can go at your own pace. Notice, members, the guiding questions. So you're going to be asked what are your thoughts, opinions, reactions to the proposed changes to the SBDM regulation and the CSIP regulation. So I will stop sharing and open it up for you to share, Matt.
All right, thank you. It looks like it's thinking about it.
I see it on my end.
Okay, perfect. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Matthew Courtney. I'm the policy advisor in the Office of Continuous Improvement and Support. I'm here today on behalf of our Associate Commissioner, Dr. Kelly Foster, who had another engagement during this time, to share with you some changes and solicit some responses and feedback to you to propose changes to our SBDM and our CSIP and our CDIP regulations. These are changes that we've made in a response to overwhelming stakeholder feedback over the last year and a half or so. I'm really looking forward to sharing them with you and getting some feedback. I think the plan for this is to go through, I'll go through all the changes for both regulations pretty quickly, and then we will pause for questions and conversation and be able to dig a little bit deeper. I am joined on the call today by Natasha Stein, who is our branch manager in District 180, which is the branch of KDE where the day-to-day work of SBDM and CSIPs and CDIPs is housed. So she is certainly a wealth of knowledge as we have this conversation with you. So we'll start with SBDM, and that regulation is 701 KAR 5100. A couple of things I want to say about this regulation before we get into the changes. You've of course have a link to the regulation. I believe that was sent out ahead of time, so you have hopefully had an opportunity to look at that. When you open that regulation, you're going to see that there are lots of strike-throughs and add-ins. That is really not representative of dramatic policy change on behalf of the department. Those changes that you're going to see are really administrative changes. So we're doing a couple of things here. In this regulation, we're cleaning up some language. We're also going to be repealing one of our 2 SBDM regulations and merging them together. So this regulation, 701 KAR 5100, will be the SBDM regulation moving forward. The second SBDM regulation, which is 701 KAR 5080, will be repealed at the April KBE board meeting. We're merging them together. So no language is being taken away or repealed, it's just being mushed together. So that's why the regulation looks like it's had a lot of changes. There are a couple of policy changes, and so what you will see on the slides moving forward is anything that represents a policy change will be bolded and underlined on these slides. So we'll go ahead and start, and we'll just go section by section through this regulation since there are so many strike-throughs and underlined additions. So section 1, there's no policy change in section 1. We are simply defining parent and teacher as they have been defined in the statute. Again, that does not represent any kind of policy change and will not have any impact on what you're doing at the local level. Section 2 of this regulation governs alternative models for SBDM, and there's 2 key policy changes that we're making around alternative models, both designed to streamline the process, eliminate some administrative burden, and give you more flexibility. So the first 4 bold and underlined bullets that you see on here, numbers 1, 3, 4, and 5, are all about creating a timeline for consistency of alternative models. So moving forward, after this regulation is approved and in force, we will accept alternative model applications from January 1 to March 1. We will then have 30 days to refer those to KBE, who will then have 30 days to review them, which means that in practice, future SBDM alternative models will be heard at our April board meeting every April. And then those will all go into effect on the same day of July 1. I see that Jenny has come back on. I'm guessing Dr. Glass is with us now, so I'm going to pause.
Thank you so much. Yes, I would like to welcome Dr. Glass to our meeting, and if you wouldn't mind, Matthew, if you wouldn't mind stop sharing just for a moment, and just so Dr. Glass can welcome folks. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny, and Matthew, sorry to interrupt your presentation. I will be brief, and I appreciate the flexibility that you provided just as I was in between meetings today. I guess the thing that we should talk a little bit about is the legislature, and I think I'm grateful for the legislature for, if only for the reason that they've given us something else to talk about besides COVID. So that's an upside to them, I suppose. We have been concerned about a few bills moving through. I'll talk about those, and I know that you're interested in them as well. One is House Bill 563, the school omnibus school choice bill. It includes 2 major provisions, one of which would open up inter-district school choice for parents outside of non-resident agreements. So districts, and I'm sorry, it sounds like we're having some kind of air raid alarm here in the Sauer building. So we'll try to work through that. Maybe the legislature's installed something. If they know that I'm perhaps critical of them, they fire that up or something. And so we'll go with that theory for now. But it includes the first provision is around inter-district school choice. And outside of resident agreements. I'm really sorry about that. The timing actually couldn't have been worse. I am concerned about the language that's in that because not that I'm opposed to public school choice. I think that there are some upsides to giving parents the ability to choose different schools for their students, but the language that's in the bill I think is far from ideal, and it will be problematic. It says that school districts cannot discriminate against students outside of their districts in admitting them into schools. That's going to be problematic because it actually will create situations where a student who lives within the district or even within a school boundary will be excluded from a school for an out-of-district student or someone that's in a different county or a different community. So consider a situation where you have the children of a staff member who have enrolled into a district. You will not be able to prioritize them over the out-of-district people. Consider where you may have siblings of students who perhaps are out of district that have enrolled in. You will not be able to prioritize them over out of district, or even if a student changes schools and then comes back to a school and it's in their neighborhood. The way this is written now, you treat them all on equal footing with someone who's not in your district or even in your community. So I think that's probably something that we could clarify and clean up, but right now it's a problematic component to this. Shifting from that section to the other section of the bill, which relates to tax credits, I'm concerned about this provision. I know that there are several of the advocacy groups that are concerned about it because it's called a neo voucher, or a school a private school voucher model. They call them a tax credit because it's a little bit different structure in how it works to avoid the name voucher and to avoid the direct allocation of public funds to a parent for private school use, but it's still the same concept. In this case, you allow a corporation or an individual to make a donation to something called an account granting organization, or an AGO. These are entities that will pop up around the state. When they make that donation, they get a tax credit for the amount of that donation. So that money then never goes into the state coffers. So effectively, it's reducing the dollars available in the state revenue that will reduce funds available for everything that the state does, including education. Though the money goes to these account granting organizations, the account granting organizations then can skim 10% of that off the top for whatever purposes they have, and then they flow the funds to these educational service providers, which are, I would say, poorly defined in the bill as to who they are. I'm concerned about this from just a graft and corruption standpoint. There's no clear regulatory environment around who these account granting organizations are, so I think you're going to see them pop up all over the place. There's no clear accountability or quality assurance to where the funds actually end up going in these education service providers. So I think we're going to end up with predictable problems of corruption, graft, poor funds going to poorly structured, poorly regulated groups, and no real accountability for outcomes or quality. Even an amendment that was added to this that would have at least required the education service providers to have background checks was removed. We will also end up with predictable elements of discrimination on a number of different grounds, or exclusion of students because they don't fit the quote unquote model of some of these schools. So in the initial bill that came out of the House, the private school tax credits were restricted to Kenton, Jefferson, and Fayette County. So effectively what that means is if you're in a rural district in the state, the available dollars for your public schools are going to be reduced through this, and those funds are going to be sent to private schools in Jefferson, Fayette, and Kenton County. So that's a practical effect of this, and the Senate may make changes to it and send it back. I think one element that allowed them to get it passed in the House was they attached full-day kindergarten funding to it, or at least they attached the language that they would fund full-day kindergarten. But it hasn't been identified what the source of those funds would be. The last budget bill that we saw come out, the legislature actually held constant or eliminated increases to SEEK funding and increases to raises for school district and state employees. So there may be some shell gaming going on on here, where it's not really any increased education funding because they just hold back other funds and move it over to fund pre-K. I'm sorry, to fund kindergarten. So lots of concerns, lots of things that we're watching on this bill. But of course, with the numbers as they are in the legislature, this legislature can do whatever it wants. So we'll continue to monitor and evaluate that. Shifting gears and looking at a different piece of legislation that we're tracking, it's House Bill 173, which deals with the reorganization of the Kentucky Board of Education. Over the past couple of years, you've seen this, the KBE really become a sort of a political weapon that governors have used back and forth. Governor Bevin over time changed the makeup of that board and stacked it with his members of his political liking that removed Commissioner Pruitt, brought in Commissioner Lewis, and then Governor Beshear challenged that. And when he became governor, he reversed all that and appointed a new board, and here I am. So what you don't want outside of just the parade of commissioners is that your state board becomes just a political tool that different governors, different legislators use to try and control education. So there are elements of House Bill 173 that seek to create a partisan balance, a demographic balance, a geographic balance, and a racial balance on the board. And I think those are good things. And over the long term, they will lead to a balanced board that looks like Kentucky, and it'll be less susceptible to you have a new governor and the whole board gets rolled and the commissioner changes and everything flips over. So there are some definite upsides to the stability that's included in 173. What was interesting is when that's the bill that moved out of the House. When it went to the Senate actually removed the student member and the teacher member that Governor Beshear had added through executive order. So we had hoped to be able to keep those two positions on. I think they provide valuable insight and perspective as the Kentucky Board of Education makes decisions. The Senate and what they said about their rationale for that was that on the teacher, they were concerned that this would be a political appointee and that someone that was used as a pawn for the governor or for political causes. So that was their rationale on the teacher. And then on the student, they just said that they didn't believe that a student had the mental acumen or maturity to be able to contribute. My experience is that is not the case. I think those of you that work with students know that they're very capable of participating in complex conversations and meetings, and oftentimes having a student present at the table changes the conversations that we have as adults for school in a positive and profound way, because you have someone who is a direct recipient to or will be an impact of the decisions that you're making, that you have to look in the eye as you make them, and that I believe leads us to make better decisions. And then the teacher perspective is incredibly valuable as someone who's in the field doing the work right now, can also contribute to policy decisions that the state board makes. So that's the removal of those two positions is what passed out of the Senate. We'll see what happens now. It has to go back to the House for concurrence, and I don't know what will happen on that, but we will see. Just a couple of other things that we're keeping track of. We saw really a disappointing budget come out this weekend from in the legislature. It's a very different budget than what Governor Beshear proposed. It flatlines SEEK funding. It makes some changes to the SEEK formulation, and basically it's held flat, which with inflationary pressures will lead to less funding available for schools next year if that's not increased. And by doing nothing on the SEEK side of the equation, we again erode at the progress that the state made with the Rose case and CARA to try and equalize funding across the state. The SEEK formula is an essential tool to create funding equity in the state. Otherwise, you revert to just property tax wealth as a driver of where school funding is high and lower. So if the state doesn't keep up on its end, all of those inequities start to creep back, and we've had several years of that now. So I think there's a legitimate argument to be made that we've violated the rulings that were in the Rose case, and so we'll have to see what happens. But that's my professional opinion. Another major element, just to keep track of, the federal government did put forth and passed, and the president signed the American Recovery Plan, which will, for Kentucky, provide nearly $2 billion in COVID relief funding. That's a lot of money. We thought that the last round of COVID relief funding was big. This is more than double that. So we're going to have to get creative about how we can use these funds for all sorts of things related to devices and buildings and extended services, and I think it's a tremendous amount of money. We're going to be able to do a lot of good with it, but we're going to have to get busy in a hurry. One of the things that may be limiting that is the legislature now wants to legislate where those funds go. The federal law says that we do not pass them through the legislature. They go directly to districts. 90% of it goes to districts, and the districts decide how they expend those funds within the confines of what federal law allows them to be spent on. The legislature is now attempting to get in front of that and direct those. That will slow down those funds and make this a much more contentious and political process. We're evaluating the language that's in the legislature versus what's in federal law. We're not entirely sure what the legislature is considering would be in compliance with federal law, so we'll have a challenge there. But that's one of the things that's being considered. The legislature wants to direct those funds. So that's sort of a legislative overview, and all sort of troubling bad news should make you worry. But at least we didn't talk about COVID for the whole 15 minutes that I've been talking with you. So things are looking up. There is a bright side. It's a sunny Kentucky day. Things are spring is on the way. So this is one of the most beautiful times of the year to be in Kentucky, is in the spring. So I'll stop there and see if there are any questions or comments just in the few minutes that we have together left.
So what questions or comments might you have for Dr. Glass before he heads to his next meeting?
Okay. Well, hearing none, Jenny, thanks so much, and thanks everyone for the time to be with you and listen in. I appreciate this group and the feedback that you provide the department. You're one of the ways that we stay connected to things going on in schools and make sure that the support that we give and the guidance and information that we provide is aligned to what you're experiencing. So we're grateful for to have all of you providing that input. Thanks, everybody. If there's anything that comes up that you didn't get a chance to ask or think a little later, please feel free to email me that, and I'll make an effort to get back to you today. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Dr. Glass. Okay, well, Matthew, if you don't mind continuing on, if you would share your deck again, and we'll continue on. I appreciate you being so flexible, Matthew.
Thank you, and of course I'm happy to be flexible. So I think we're here. So we're again talking about school-based decision-making and changes to that regulation. I'll restate what I was saying before Dr. Glass came on, because it does represent a policy change, and so I think it's important that we cover that thoroughly. So Section 2 of our regulation governs alternative models for school-based decision-making, and one of the policy changes we're making this year is to shift this into a formal timeline. So right now, alternative applications come to KDE throughout the year, but under the new procedure, they'll be submitted to us from between January 1st and March 1st. We will then refer those to the KBE, who will hear them at their next board meeting. So in practice, that means in the future, all alternative SBDM model applications will be heard at the April board meeting, and then they will all go into effect on July 1st at the same date. So this process creates some alignment for us, and a standard timeline and procedure for all schools seeking alternative models. Bullet 8 on the slide represents another policy change that has been long in the making, and that is providing you with some flexibility if you want to create an alternative model. So under the new regulation, an alternative model application is only required if you are making a change to the statutory ratio of membership. So if you want to add non-voting members after this regulation is in effect, you can do that. You don't have to tell us, you don't have to fill out an application and wait. If you want to add 2 teachers, as long as you add 2 parents and you keep that statutory ratio the same, you do not have to submit an application to us. The only time that an application for an alternative model would need to be submitted is if you're changing the statutorily required membership ratios. So if you want to add 3 parents and no new teachers, that would require an application. If you want to add a voting non-certified staff person, that would require an application because that would change the voting ratio. So we're hoping that that provides a little bit of flexibility and reduces some paperwork burden, because we have lots of schools who want to add non-voting members, and right now they have to complete the paperwork. It has to go before the board. They have to do all the votes and all the things, and you won't have to do all of that to add a non-voting member in the future. Section 3 of the regulation discusses exemptions for from school-based decision-making. I don't think we have any exemptions in place in Kentucky right now, maybe a couple where we have one school, one building, one school, one district situations. But we've maintained provisions so that if in the future we're able to offer exemptions again, those provisions are already there. The only policy changes for this are, again, that timeline. So we've aligned that timeline to the alternative model timeline. So April board meeting is going to be the SBDM board meeting moving forward. We'll hear all of those alternative models, all of those exemptions. And we've also added a stipulation that schools who seek an exemption to SBDM must reapply for that exemption annually. Exemptions to SBDM are usually only granted under very strict accountability related purposes. And so since accountability changes every year and your accountability rating and scores on those components change every year, we will be asking schools to reapply for SBDM exemptions. Moving right along, Section 4 discusses training requirements for SBDM members. There are no policy changes to this, so all of the existing training requirements will stay in place. You will notice that there's a lot of underlining in that section. That's just because we've moved stuff. That's because we've merged 2 regulations into one, but no actual policy changes in Section 4. Section 5 requires us to maintain a database of school-based decision-making members. Again, you're going to see lots of underlining in this section, but there are no policy changes. So you will still submit your SBDM membership to us by November 1st, and we will continue to maintain a database and training verifications. Section 6 incorporates the actual paperwork, the application, into the regulation. Again, there are no policy changes here, and there are no substantive changes proposed to this actual application document. Again, you'll see that it's underlined. That's because we're merging 2 regulations, and this component was incorporated in the other regulation that we'll be repealing. So those are that's a quick overview of SBDM. I'm going to go ahead and do the CDIP and CDIP regulation because there's only one slide on that, and then we'll pause and open the floor for conversation. Before I do that, I will say that this SBDM, switching gears, CSIP and CDIP change, again, it's really about reducing burden and reducing paperwork and sort of administrative burden. So this is one that if we didn't tell you about in this meeting, most of you probably wouldn't even notice that changes have been made. You would just kind of wake up one day and go, wow, this e-proof system's a little more fluid than it used to be. So 4 key changes in this regulation. So the first one is that we are removing any named diagnostics from the regulation. What that does for us, if the regulation says we have to have a specific diagnostic, then we have to actually have that diagnostic in the eProof platform, which for you creates extra clicks and a lot of copying and pasting between diagnostics. What this allows us to do by removing name diagnostics and switching over to more general language, so the new language might say something like a narrative summary of the current state of the school. We would have previously called that an executive summary. What it allows us to do by using that flexible language, we can change stuff in eProve and kind of move some things around to reduce redundancy, reduce the copying and pasting, reduce the number of clicks in eProve. We've also added language on page 3 that ensures the regulation stays in compliance with federal funding requirements. What this language allows us to do is if there's a change from the feds related to, say, Title I funding, CSIPs are an important component of Title I. They're a requirement of Title I funding. So if they make a required change, this allows us to just go into eProve and make that change. We don't have to reopen this regulation in order to remain in compliance with a federal regulation. We can, since the feds trump us, what they say goes, no matter what our reg says, this language allows us to just go into eProve and make that change. We've added the English Learner Service Plan, also known as the LAU plan, to the CDIP. So this sounds like a new thing, but it's actually not. Districts are already required by federal law to have a LAU plan or an English Learner Service Plan in place. But there's been a lot of confusion over where that plan lives, how that plan is regulated, posting requirements, timelines, things like that. And so we're simply putting it into the CDIP. That way it all falls under the CDIP. So instead of having two systems, a CDIP system and a LAU plan system, you just drop your LAU plan into your CDIP system. It follows all the same rules, same posting requirements, same stakeholder engagement requirements as your CDIP. And finally, we've clarified some language to allow other state statutes or regulations to feed into CSIPs or CDIPs. So this has been in practice for many years. Many of the components of the CDIP that are required components, like the professional learning plan, the continuation of learning plan, the school safety plan, the gap assurance plan, all of those are fed into this plan by other statutes or regulations. And what this language allows us to do is it's really what we could call evergreen language. It's language that that allows other regulations to change without having to then open this regulation and also make a change for compliance. So let's say that in the future, we no longer require a professional learning plan. That's required by a separate regulation. So if they repeal that regulation, then it just comes out of the CDIP and CSIP without us having to open this regulation and actually take it out. So it's a piece really that allows us a little more flexibility so that we can better respond to the needs of the department, respond to changes in statutes and regulations without having to go through the whole regulation amendment process every time. So those are our proposed changes to both SBDM and CSIP and CDIP regulation, and we would love to solicit any feedback that you have for us about these changes, thoughts, opinions, or reactions to these proposed changes. They are all scheduled to go before the board in April. So any feedback that you have, we would love to hear that today. So I'll mute and Jenny, let you facilitate that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that valuable information. So I will open it up and I did send to them the proposed changes. So hopefully, I know this is a crazy busy time for you principals, but if you have had a chance to look at that, or if you have some questions about what you've heard this morning, please unmute yourself, or if you're more comfortable using the chat, we will monitor that as well. Just providing some wait time. Okay, well, you will also have an opportunity to provide feedback on the exit slip from today's meetings. Okay, I do see a question from Kim. It says, how many alternative models are there?
Thanks, Kim, for that question. So I'm not 100% sure if you're asking how many approved models are there in schools. In terms of creating an alternative model, you have a lot of flexibility to create that model however you see fit. So if your district, if your school and your teachers come together and want to create a model, you can do that. Approved right now. Okay, thanks for that clarification, Kim. I don't know that I have that number handy.
I do, Matthew. Sorry
Go
to
for it,
interrupt.
Natasha.
Thanks for the question, Kim. That's a really great question. We actually have 26 approved alternative models right now on file at the department.
Okay. Thank you, Kim, for that question. Any others?
Well, I would add to that too. So after this regulation, that number will probably drop because a lot of those models are to add non-voting student members. And so that will no longer be a required alternative model application in the future. You'll be able to just do that. So in the future, there will be fewer alternative models on the books.
Okay, and I do want to ask one more. I just want to make sure, when you said with the alternative model, we could make sure that we include the same number of teachers as we do parents, correct?
That's correct. As long as you are maintaining the ratio that's in the statute, then you can grow your SBDM council without filling out the paperwork. Now, if you want to make a change that is not in line with the statutory membership ratios, that's when you would fill out the application.
And the statutory membership ratios, are those the same? Or are those changing?
They have not changed.
I'm including those what? I'm sorry.
They have not changed.
Okay, so because I think I'm looking more toward minority representative on our councils. Would we refer to that under this as well?
So it's all about that ratio. So
right.
if you let's say that you wanted to add an additional like an additional seat, and that person's whole role is you are a minority representative and you're in addition to the ratio. In that scenario, you would need to fill out the application, submit it to us for approval. If you said, well, you know, we've got our ratio and we're going to add a minority representative to each category so that the ratio stays the same, that would not require an alternative model application.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. All right, just making sure I didn't hear someone who also came off mute. Thank you, Matthew, so much for the information. If there are further questions, I will be sure to send them your way. They're able to respond to all the parts of today's meeting in our exit slip. So if there's additional questions, I will get back with you. Thank you all for sharing. Appreciate it. Thanks. All right, now we have Dr. Thomas Woods Tucker, who is the Chief Equity Officer that we have. He is in the Office of Teaching and Learning here at the Kentucky Department of Education. And so he will be sharing about KDE's efforts to support diversity, equity, and inclusion. And your guiding question for this portion is, what feedback might you provide around KDE's ongoing equity-related work? So, Dr. Thomas Woods Tucker, I am happy to turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Jenny, and a huge thank you to all of our participants today. I'm going to switch in and out with Dr. Sweeney. His presentation will follow mine. Dr. Sweeney, would you please go ahead and share the presentation?
Yes, sure thing.
Okay. While Dr. Sweeney is pulling up the presentation, I really want to thank our building principals, our teachers and support staff. You are truly our frontline folks, and nowhere in our teacher preparation programs or principal school programs that we learn how to navigate a pandemic. So thank you for your tremendous work. And again, thank you for the opportunity to share a few words with you today. And I promise to stay on task, Jenny. Next slide, please.
All right. So let's just have a moment of mindfulness. So when that dot gets to the very top, right now, let's take a deep breath in and hold. And let's take a deep breath out and hold. So you can continue this. This is called box breathing. It's actually been done by the Navy SEALs, and it's done in an effort to relieve stress. So we know that principals are under a tremendous amount of stress. So we want you to practice that mindfulness and just be present with us this morning. Also, we're going to talk to you about some pretty deep conversations and topics. So inhale courage and exhale doubt. Inhale that courage and exhale that doubt. And lastly, I just want you to repeat after me. I am enough, because we know that with the amount of stress that you're under, sometimes it can feel like, you may feel like you're just not. And I'm here to tell you that we know that you are working your behind off to make sure that your students are supported, that your colleagues are supported, and along with your families and communities. So thank you for everything that you do. You are absolutely enough.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Sweeney. And also, when we think about mindfulness, being in the moment, that is true for our principals, it's true for our teaching and support staffs, and it's also true for our students. As many of our schools have begun to open, and some of you have opened up fully, please keep in mind that our students are going to come, or they're coming to school with questions. They're coming to school stressful. So let's take some time out to understand some of the challenges that our students are going to have for the rest of this year and into next year. Real quickly, a couple of our learning targets here. Principals will learn about the efforts the Kentucky Department of Education is focusing on to work towards more equitable schools. You'll learn more about upcoming tools to discuss courageous conversations about race and privilege, both in my short talk and Dr. Sweeney's. And principals will reflect on a draft of our equity dashboard indicators and offer feedback. Next slide, please. One of my favorite quotes that I think is so appropriate for this time, and was written in 1963, and I pulled it from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech. We've also come to this hallowed spot to remind America of the fierce urgency of now. This is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice. Now is the time to open the doors of opportunity to all of God's children. Now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood and sisterhood. To me, this piece, this paragraph taken from the I Have a Dream speech, talks about the urgency of now. If you would take a few seconds, colleagues, please in the chat box, describe or put in a word or two that really sticks out in this piece. Again, what are some of those words that stick out? Yes, tranquilizing drug of gradualism, urgency, all of God's children. Thank you. Next slide, please. You know, I stopped to pause on Dr. King's speech because what he talked about and his colleagues talked about in the 60s and 1963, when he penned that speech, the urgency of now, the urgency is still now. As you know, on Saturday, we came to remember the life taken too soon of Breonna Taylor, in which we need to ensure that we provide opportunities for all of God's children, for all children, regardless of their ethnicity, regardless of their socioeconomic status, regardless of their national origin. And so here, the Kentucky Department of Education believes that schools should be safe havens where all students and staff, regardless of their background, their race, color, religion, or gender, sexual orientation, etc., feel safe and respected. And I want you to know that we're here to support and assist you in your diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, and you're going to hear more about that briefly. Then also, we want to help lead the charge in diversity, equity, and inclusion and help you establish a culture that does not accept any types of achievement gaps. And we're here to support you. Next slide. A couple things here regarding our commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. As many of you know, the Kentucky Department of Education has identified 4 priorities in its strategic plan: equity, achievement, collaboration, and integrity. Back in July, and one of the things that really brought me to the Kentucky Department of Education in July from a school district was a bold move by your Kentucky Department of Education to affirm its commitment to racial equity and racial justice in schools in a resolution. And I say that's bold because very few boards of education across the country, and I don't know how many of your boards of education in your local school districts have drafted an equity resolution or an equity policy. And so this was huge for Kentucky and the country, really. And very quickly, that we all need to embrace diversity, equity, and inclusion to ensure that all of our children are successful, and that we believe all of our students and staff deserve experiences that are respected. Our students deserve teachers and administrators who are prepared to help them to be successful in life. So, and we want to value the unique experiences that our principals and teachers bring to the classroom and bring to the school. And also, which I thought was probably one of the most profound things in our resolution, is that the board of the State Board of Education and Commissioner Glass said that we need to commit to listening and seeking, we need to commit to listening and seek those students and those staff members who traditionally have not been heard, particularly people of color. And so that was huge. Although we've just heard from Commissioner Glass how we have lawmakers who are trying to take that away. So I encourage school boards to ensure that there is a student voice, a teacher voice, and a principal voice in all the decisions that they make. Next slide, please. So where are we now with some of our issues? First, I think we need to acknowledge that our teachers, our principals, our support staff, and superintendents are facing some of the most difficult challenges in the history of education, heightened by bipartisan politics, not only at the national level, but also at the state level, as I just referenced. Then also, one of the most important things that we need to keep in mind is that how do we take care of the social and emotional needs of our students, staff, our administrators? How do we take care of your needs at this time? And we're going to explore that a little later. Next slide now. Some of the other things that we're doing is that we're ensuring that we're utilizing the resources of professional staff. And I encourage you to continue to tap into the expertise of your counselors, your psychologists, social workers, as well as community partners. You are building principals. You are the trust agents in your school community. And if there's anyone who can marshal resources, it's our building principals. We're also trying to build true comprehensive school counseling programs that are preventive versus reactive. Most of our school mental health practitioners should be Tier 1 versus Tier 2 and Tier 3. We're working with the Department for Behavioral Health, Developmental, and Intellectual Disabilities to educate schools on integrated mental health and asset mapping. Dr. Sweeney, do you want to talk a little bit about that? You're muted. Dr. Sweeney, you're muted.
All right, sorry about that.
That's okay.
I've got a 5-year-old here. He's on quarantine from daycare, so you might hear him in the background. Apologies. So with the Department for Behavioral Health, Developmental, and Intellectual Disabilities, we are working on integrated mental health. One thing that we're constantly hearing from our school mental health professionals is that they struggle with the partnership with our community-based agencies, and they want to redefine that partnership and enhance it so that all of those partners that work on school mental health, student mental health, they can focus on tiers 1, 2, and 3. Traditionally, we see our mental health partners coming in at tiers 2 and 3. So tier 2, when there needs to be individual or small group counseling, or tier 3, when there's a crisis. But I would tell you that our mental health partners from our communities can come in on tier 1. They can do whole group lessons, especially when talking about emotions and normalizing those emotions. We'll talk a little bit more about that later on.
Then also, I don't have to tell you all this. You see it every day, that we need to be aware that societal issues that impact our communities also impact our schools. Our students bring things that are happening at home to school, and they bring things that are happening in our community to school. And the way that we're going to be successful in addressing this is that we need to collaborate and work together as a community. Next slide, please. A couple of our ongoing equity-related initiatives. Some of these initiatives, many of you have been part of. Hopefully, you've been able to take part in some of the work groups. At the most fundamental level is the Kentucky Academic Standards implementation. They ensure equitable access to grade level appropriate learning for all students, pre-K through 12. I'm going to date myself here in a little bit. You know, the standards movement began, albeit very, very rocky and still somewhat controversial, in 1983 with a nation at risk. But in looking at the Kentucky academic standards, and as some of you may know, I also head up the Office of Teaching and Learning. And so we're able to work closely with the creation of our standards. And we're really want to ensure that our students, K through 12, understand the minimum requirements of what students should know and be able to do. And so we're really excited about that. And we're excited about looking at our standards. Another important equity initiative that we have is our work with the Council of Chief State School Officers in providing high quality instructional resources. We believe that we should equip and empower local schools in evaluating, selecting, and providing access to high quality instructional resources to support all students. Again, another equity initiative with engaging, relevant, standards aligned grade level assignments, and I might add that it's culturally relevant. You'll hear Dr. Sweeney talk briefly about our multi-tiered system of support. Another thing that really drew me here to the agency is that when we look at our MTSS framework, it's not just about academic and behavioral support, it's also about providing social and emotional learning. So again, a full array of supports from our students that really value the whole child. One of the things that I hope that some of you, or if not all of you, have been able to complete is my policy and practice scan that I sent out a couple months ago through the Office of Communication. And so essentially what we want to ask our principals, our superintendents, district staff, parents, students, everyone here to talk to us about some of the equitable practices that are already in place in your district, as well as some of those things that will be. Next slide, please. Dan, can you talk a little bit about this equity slide, this equity scan we have?
Yes, I can. I'm putting it in the chat box right now for you. And I'm also sharing it on the screen. So this is the equity scan, equity and inclusion scan. And we're seeking to understand what equity means to our school communities. We're trying to better understand if our schools and our school districts have an equity and inclusion action plan. Is equity included in your district strategic plan, et cetera? We're also looking for academic achievement gaps that might exist between students, and more. I also want to show you what else we're doing. So we're also very interested in doing an equity dashboard. And in a second, I'd like to show you the indicators that we've pulled to seek feedback from these, from you, from our principals, on these indicators. This is going to help us better understand what you need. We understand that as school principals, it's very hard for you. It can be very hard for you to dig into the data often. And we don't want you to have to pull from multiple sources to get the data that you need. So all of this work is to be able to get you better access to that data so that, again, you can assess your needs, you can assess what's going on, where the academic gaps are, where the opportunity gaps are, and then work to improve those.
And then the next thing that I want to talk about here is the Kentucky Academy for Equity in Teaching. I strongly encourage you to take advantage of that program, work with your school superintendent and other folks. It's a recently launched initiative to recruit, retain a more diverse workforce of teachers by focusing on 3 areas: to inspire, prepare and educate the future, and current teacher workforce. And so it's a huge game changer in terms of being able to create a workforce that's more reflective of your student body. And lastly, some other equity-related initiatives that I would like to talk about. We're speaking to district and school leaders about addressing disproportionality in special education and ensuring access to high rigorous courses like advanced placement, international baccalaureate, and Cambridge International, as well as dual credit for students. Again, we are a resource here for you at the Department of Education. We're also speaking to districts and school leaders about common obstacles that prevent this access, such as Algebra 1 in some places still being a gatekeeper in 8th grade, outdated policies and practices and over-reliance on test scores, inadequate parent-caregiver input, and most importantly, improving preschool education. We're also engaging in our own continuous improvement through professional learning opportunities with national experts such as Dr. Roger Cleveland. I understand that Roger may have done some professional development with you all. Some of the work that he does, we're going to make sure that it's online at KDE and free for all educators here in the Commonwealth. Then we're also investigating how to marshal and reallocate our assets that we have here in the agency and to use our expertise to ensure that every child in the Commonwealth has the resources, teachers, principals, intervention, and support they need to be successful in life and beyond. Next. And lastly, I'm really happy about these initiatives here. We're providing sample language to schools and districts that they can use to adapt in creating the diversity, equity, and inclusion plans. We're also working with Panorama to help create surveys. In fact, the survey that Dr. Sweeney just shared with you was a Panorama survey to better understand some of the existing equity policies and practices that you have in your schools and in your district. Also, we're encouraging vertical equity to be embedded in each school district's strategic plan. And that simply means providing equitable opportunities for all students, regardless of what privilege they may or may not have. And then also, as you heard, we're working on an equity dashboard, which we'll make available to all of our schools and districts. And we're providing access to high quality standards and aligned instructional resources to ensure equitable access to learning. And that's through the Council of Chief State School Officers. And you'll hear more about that. That's going to be a competitive grant process for you all to compete to provide equitable, high quality instructional resources to your students. Next slide, please. And lastly, we need to have more courageous conversations, and we're helping to lead those efforts here in the Kentucky Department of Education, because there is a lack of understanding among many of our stakeholders of what equity, equality, and inclusivity mean in our schools. And then we need to do more work about and helping all of our folks, whether at KDE or in our districts, conduct courageous conversations and create common ground to create support for all students and broaden the definition of diversity to go beyond ethnic diversity. And then again, how do we ensure that students see themselves in the curriculum, critical pedagogy? A couple things about equity, definitions that I've used. Equity means respecting each student's culture and our underlying culture, and providing each student the resources he or she needs to be successful. Some of you've heard some of our national politicians, some who represent our Commonwealth. They are stating that equity is a code word for implicit racism. It is not a code word for implicit racism. It is a code, not even a code word, it's an explicit word to ensure that we give each student, each of our 650,000 students in the Commonwealth, the skills and resources he or she needs to be successful. Whereas equality, on the other hand, means treating every student in the same manner, irrespective of differences, and assuming that all students have bootstraps. As you know, all of our students don't come to school with bootstraps. I also liken this to us saying, okay, students, we have this one-to-one initiative now. Take home your laptop tonight. You know better than I know. That's not enough. Just taking home a laptop tonight without consideration for connectivity to the internet, without professional development how to use that laptop, means nothing. It means that the student and some students are going to continue to experience inequities as it relates to the curriculum. And then inclusivity. Inclusivity is what we should be aiming for at all times. It's asking all of our stakeholders to provide a voice, and we're encouraging all of our stakeholders to have a voice in the educational process. Again, looking at critical pedagogy. Next slide. And I'll now close with this. A meritocracy where everyone has pulled him or herself up by their bootstraps suggests that all students should just pull themselves up by our bootstraps. But we know that many of our traditionally marginalized students, often students of color, many of our poor students, simply don't get to have a pair of boots. Damien.
Yeah, and we used to also talk about the achievement gap. I did a lot of research on this for my dissertation. I looked at advanced placement and who was getting access to advanced placement, and I looked at, I considered how to recruit, retain, and support Black, Latinx, and low-income students. And a lot of my research suggests that Black families, Latinx families, traditionally marginalized families, aren't even getting the information about some of these opportunities. So in Kentucky, for instance, we are so fortunate to have up to 10 free dual credit classes for any high school student in our state. But again, our families have to be informed of these opportunities. If we do have traditionally marginalized kids that aren't being informed or aren't accessing these programs, then we suggest doing parent nights, parent workshops, caregiver workshops to make sure that they have the information that they need so they can make informed decisions. All right, so the last thing that we wanted to do was we wanted to get your feedback on this equity dashboard. Again, we want you to be able to take a quick glance and know exactly where your school is on some of these indicators. Is your enrollment in gifted and talented population, is it equitable? Are there inequities? We want you to quickly be able to see that so that you can reflect on where you are in order to grow and work towards where you can be. Okay, same thing with special education. So take a look at this for elementary, take a look at this for middle school, and we would love to know if you feel that these are the indicators you really need to be able to see bar graphs and colored bar graphs on to kind of assess your equity, or if we're missing anything. Take a look at that and then let us know in the chat box. We would really appreciate your feedback. We also believe in data walks. So a data walk is something amazing. We used to do this at Seneca High School, where I came from in Jefferson. And what we would do is we would put all of these indicators on chart paper in the theater, and then we would go around, obviously this was pre-COVID, but we would go around with our staff and we would look at different data points, and then everybody would have sticky notes, and you could stick those, you could provide solutions on those sticky notes. How can we improve this data? So we encourage you to do that, not only with your staffs, but also with your caregivers and also with your students. What are you seeing here? Is there anything that you would change or add. I was working on a professional learning network with Northern Kentucky last week, and we talked about this one, enrollment in career and technical education pathways by subpopulation. And they made a great point. They said, well, you know, most of our students participate in CTE pathways. So instead of looking at CTE pathways alone, we would love to know who's actually completing those programs, who's getting certifications, and then we would like to know that by subpopulation to ensure that there's equity there. You know, so that's
Absolutely.
the kind of feedback that we're looking for. Yes.
And also, Dr. Sweeney, as our principals are examining this tool here, or what might be in our toolbox, our equity dashboard toolbox, you may want to reflect on what's in your building improvement plan or what's in your district strategic plan, because some of these items may be in there. And if so, please place those items in the chat box as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, we would really love it. Oh, awesome, Toya, that's great. Thank you for that feedback. And we're so excited because, like I said, it's going to be colorful. It's going to be intuitive. So, you know, you're not going to have to dig from one point of one system and go to a different system. And you're not going to have to use filters in Infinite Campus. It'll be right there. Now, the data that we provide with this equity dashboard, you may see something and you may say to yourself, okay, so we're having some equity issues with our CTE certifications. Let me do some more digging. Okay, but this is going to be that quick glance that's going to say, all right, are there issues? Are there not? You know, and allow you to reflect towards growth.
Yeah. And it's going to be free, and you can use this to update annually your building improvement plan or your district strategic plan.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. And so we're also looking, we've got several considerations here. So we're also interested in, you know, in the school report card, there's an indicator that says access to effective teaching by year served. So we're interested in adding that. Racial and ethnic diversity of the teaching force, access to high quality academic supports like tutoring, academic RTI, after school tutoring, school climate information. And then we're also very interested in seeing how, if there are ways that we can incorporate student voice, teacher voice, etc. Okay. All right. All right. Thank you for any feedback that you can provide there.
And we can, you want to go ahead and advance to, okay, there you go.
Right here?
Yep. Okay. And then, and to close before, you know, I definitely want to get some feedback. Jenny, do we have a little time left so that I can answer a couple questions if folks
Of course.
may have?
Of course.
Okay. You know, folks, it's up to us. It's up to all of us. It's up to all the villagers in the village to ensure that our students, our 650,000 students, are successful here in the Commonwealth. I mean, our economy, not only here in the Commonwealth, but our economy and our democracy in the nation depends on it. And one of the vehicles we're going to use is that we need to continue to look and examine our privilege and implicit biases. We're going to give our folks here at KDE and across the Commonwealth the tools to help you do that. We know it's very difficult and it's tough work because it's about, you know, really looking inward versus outward. By doing so, we can reflect on where we want to go as a school community, where we want to go as a country. And I encourage you to approach this in a growth mindset. Approach this difficult work that failure is an opportunity to grow. Having these difficult but respectful conversations is the best way to grow, as opposed to having a fixed mindset that, you know, we're indoctrinating folks into diversity, equity, inclusion, that this is going to fail and it's going to limit our abilities to lead. But when you look at the changing demographics in this country, and I'll get to talk a little bit about that in the next hour with members of our Kentucky Rising group, some of your middle school and high school students and college students, about where this country is going in terms of demographic shifts. it's important that we bring all people to the table so all of God's children, as I said earlier, have an opportunity to be successful.
Yes. Dr. Woods Tucker, Toya, Principal Toya says, what about what has been done in the past and analyze status of implementation or sustainability in reference to our equity dashboard? So I do like that idea. I would love for you to let us know what that indicator could look like. What is something actionable that we can put in there to kind of better understand what you mean there? That would be helpful.
I guess I'm thinking about just change complexity of, what if you tried before and has failed and why? So in that conversation of courageous conversations of why has it failed?
Okay.
So I could have done a better job at
No, that's helpful.
It's just that way. It's honoring because it might be, well, here we go again, and then there's move forward. So I guess it was just those conversations of analyzing why change has not occurred.
Okay. Well, when we look at the change process, and I think and specifically when you look at places where these conversations have not moved, and I want to be the first to say we've struggled here at KDE as well, and we're taking a couple of steps back and holding smaller conversations in our divisions and in our various levels of leadership to explore exactly what you're talking about. But I think when you start to look at change, it begins with building that coalition of the willing, because there will be, and again, I want to always operate with a growth mindset, but you're going to have a small group of folks that is going to take a while to get them on board, to get them to a place of understanding. And a small group of them may not get there, but I believe the time is right and is right right now to work with that coalition of the willing, and start with your students. I mean, we have some of the most gifted kids in America. They are articulate and they want to see change happen. They want a better world for themselves and for their children. So again, start with that coalition of the willing and invite every villager you possibly can to the table.
Yeah, I could see some amazing PBLs around this with students. You can have a principal-student dialogue where you're showing them this data and then saying, what are some ways that you think we can improve this? That student voice would be powerful. One other thing that is really powerful is Dr. Woods Tucker introduced me to this idea of asset framing. Dr. Woods Tucker, would you mind terribly talking a little bit about asset framing and how that can be helpful with these conversations?
Yeah, Dr. Sweeney, I was getting ready to jump into it, but I was going to call it a more archaic term, finger pointing. Many times when we start the change process, it's about shame, blame, and finger pointing. And if you really want to sink an initiative, you start in that manner. Asset framing is about looking at the positives, looking at the positive things that people bring, looking at assets before you start looking at the negatives, the negative things that people bring, before you start looking at some of the shortcomings. And so I would start with assets. What are some of the assets that your community have? What are some of the assets that your students and staff, resiliency, grit, and determination that your students have before looking at some of the things that you need to work on?
Right. And we were really intentional about not calling this like an equity scorecard because we didn't want this to feel like it was punitive or, as you looked at equity, if you found that you had a program that wasn't as open or openly accessible as you wanted it to be, is like you shouldn't look down on yourselves. We really want this to be something where you honestly take a look at what's going on and then just work towards progress. Okay, so it's definitely not about finger pointing, as Dr. Woods Tucker said.
And we'll talk a little later about some of the early returns on our scan. We had to scan out since November, and we started asking our superintendents about some of these equity questions. For example, in a question about whether your school or district currently has an equity and inclusion plan, about 55% of respondents said no. And another question asking whether equity is included in your district strategic plan, 33% of the residents said no, and more than 51% of respondents said equity is included in their district strategic plan. So certainly when we look at this early data, those are some of the areas that we really need to concentrate on if we're going to ensure that we are really focusing on diversity, equity, and inclusion in our district. And lastly, what do our stakeholders say they want and need? And this has guided our work in terms of how we want to deliver resources to our school districts. Most of our students, as you know, are white and need exposure to more diversity and assistance with unintentional biases. Folks are saying, show us models of best practice. Include more than race or ethnicity. Notice I said earlier, we need to expand the definition of diversity, and that is the right thing to do to ensure that we are more inclusive of our entire staff and students. And folks are asking that we provide guidance and resources, real resources, free resources too, to help us make an equitable and rigorous learning environment a reality for our students. And what I consider most important here is continue to take feedback from you, our principals and other stakeholders on the issues and hold meetings with teachers, staff, and families, providing a real voice from the field. And please know that we can learn much from you. And so what would you like us to know after hearing our efforts to improve diversity, equity, and inclusion, not only at KDE, but across the Commonwealth? Okay, Jen, we'll turn it back over to you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing. We appreciate your time, Dr. Woods-Tucker, and for sharing this very important information. And once again, principals, if you do have comments or questions that you think of afterwards on the exit slip today, you will have that opportunity to provide those questions, comments, and we will be sure to share those with Dr. Woods-Tucker. All right, at this time, I will turn it over to Dr. Damian Sweeney, who will continue on in the conversation, especially around the school counselor.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jenny. So today we're going to talk a little bit about social emotional support for students and then the school counselor's role. And I'll be answering the guiding question, in what ways might principals utilize their school counselors? So just so you know, I'm the program coordinator for comprehensive school counseling here. One of my jobs is to help build comprehensive school counseling programs that are aligned throughout our state. All right, so first and foremost, you do not have guidance counselors at your school working for you. You have school counselors. Guidance counselor is an outdated term, and guidance counselors of old used to really focus on pushing students towards transition, whether that transition was from elementary to middle school to high school, or high school to post-secondary options. So your school counselor is going to work within 3 domains, which are going to be the academic domain, the social and emotional wellness domain, and then the career domain. A school counselor is focused on the whole child. All right. We've recently created a document called Kentucky Framework of Best Practices for School Counselors. It's awesome, and it is aligned to the American School Counseling Association's national model. So I want to give you just a little bit of history, and I promise you're going to get something for yourself out of this time we have together. We're going to talk a little bit about you and your personal journey in a minute. So in terms of history, so the what, in terms of the Kentucky Framework of Best Practices for School Counselors, again, it was released in July of 2020. And before that, Kentucky Standards for School Counselors were last updated in 2006. Why our comprehensive school counseling programs look very different based on the district and school counselors work in. So I worked in a very large district, as you know. I used to work in Jefferson County Public Schools. I still work in Jefferson County Public Schools on a memorandum of agreement with the Kentucky Department of Education. But it was not odd, or it was always the case that a school within my district, I worked at Seneca, and a school down the street, another high school down the street, could have a very different looking comprehensive school counseling program. So we're seeing differences within our own districts and of course all the way throughout our state. So again, part of this work is to make sure that we're aligned and we're rowing in the same direction, moving towards the same goals, which are to support our students. And then another why is many school counselors throughout our state have historically been tasked with inappropriate activities according to the American School Counseling Association. Now, I'm going to show you this document. This is appropriate and inappropriate activities for school counselors by the American School Counseling Association. And I know the first thing you're thinking is, oh my gosh, inappropriate activities. The first thing I see is building the master schedule. Whenever I show this to principals, they're like, I had no idea. I don't know what I'm going to do. So we can talk about that. All right, but appropriate activities for school counselors are going to be that advisement and appraisal, right? So again, that support for academic planning, orientation, coordination, and academic advising for new students, interpreting achievement tests, providing counseling to students who are tardy or absent, providing counseling to students who have disciplinary problems, short-term individual and small counseling services to students. I want all of my school counselors throughout our state doing individual and small group counseling. Can you imagine being a student at home right now, right? You've been in a virtual world for a year and nobody has told you that the anxiety that you're experiencing or the depression that you're feeling or the isolation or loneliness that you're feeling are absolutely normal. Can you imagine what that might feel like for a 12, 13, 14-year-old or younger or older? Right. So one of the things that I really want our school counselors to do is to get in there, get in those classrooms, do that small group counseling, offer those small group counseling, do the short-term individual counseling, and then do those whole group lessons that we'll talk about in a second. Again, consulting with teachers to schedule and present school counseling curriculum lessons is going to be something important, interpreting student records, analyzing GPAs, consulting with teachers. So we've got all kinds of great stuff that school counselors can do. But unfortunately, again, many of our school counselors are spending the majority of their time on these inappropriate activities for school counselors, okay? So that's part of our purpose for today, is really to show you the appropriate role of a school counselor. Okay. The how. So school counselors in Kentucky work through the framework to reflect on where they are, and they're going to utilize two things. We've got a self-assessment rubric in the back of this document. We've also got a program assessment tool. The self-assessment rubric is going to help you figure out, where am I as a school counselor on my journey to building a comprehensive school counseling program? And the program assessment tool is going to let you literally assess your program, reflect on it, and then say, all right, this is where I am. This is what I need to do in order to grow and to truly become a comprehensive school counseling program. And then Kentucky school counselors build capacity by improving their knowledge of professional responsibilities, growing their leadership and advocacy skills, and implementing a comprehensive school counseling program by utilizing the framework as their guide. All right, now, so my first year at KDE, I've been there, this is my third year. Apologies again for the 5-year-old from daycare in quarantine, but we redefined a Kentucky school counselor, and this is the definition. We are certified mental health professionals supporting all K-12 students in their social, emotional, academic, and career development. Through our comprehensive school counseling program, counselors provide data-informed, universal, and targeted learning experiences to develop the whole child in a diverse society. So you see things like data-informed, right? Our counselors should be looking at 3 pieces of data. Okay, along with, they can look at all kinds of data, but 3 pieces of data are especially important for school counselors because they can impact your students' performance in these 3 areas. So they should be looking at attendance data, behavior data, and course passing data. Course passing data can include things like graduation rates, how many courses are you not performing well in. They can include all kinds of things. Okay, but again, a data-driven school counselor is going to be able to impact the whole child in a diverse society. All right, and then this document is for practicing school counselors and you, our school administrators. And the purpose for articulating clear statewide competencies is to provide a resource for school counselors to better understand what they should be doing in schools and to support school counselors in advocating for the importance of their profession, engaging in professional reflection and self-assessment, and pursuing their own professional learning. Now, we have to be honest with ourselves. Many of our counselors, unless they're unless there's somebody at the district that's really directing this work, or unless they're coming to an educational cooperative session with me, they're not necessarily getting professional development that focuses on their role as a school counselor. So we've really got to do work to improve that. And we've got some big things in the works on that. So the background for this document was Senate Bill, it was formerly known as Senate Bill 1, now Senate Bill 8. This happened after Marshall County, what happened with the Marshall County shooting. So there's a bigger focus on trauma and crisis response. We also talk about how at the core, the work of the school counselors provide direct and indirect student services in support of the 3 domains that I've been mentioning. And to ensure their effectiveness, school counselors continually engage in a cycle of improvement. All right, Jenny Ray has been an amazing partner along with Paul Prater and Stacy, and she said, principals really need to know that the framework that you're talking about is aligned with the Danielson framework that you use to evaluate our school counselors. All right, so I want to just finish this section up before going into modeling a quick lesson for you and tell you about a few things that are really cool. Our school counseling program should all have advisory councils. There should be school counseling advisory councils that meet a minimum of twice a year. They should have you on those advisory councils, students, parents or caregivers, community members, etc. All right, those meetings are simply to reflect on what's happening in the comprehensive school counseling program and then make suggestions or recommendations as to where they can go next, how they can improve. All right, all of our programs should have mission and vision statements. We've got templates for that, and I have a professional development I have on that as well. All of our counselors should be doing school data summaries, so they should be looking at the data from the school and then figuring out, now how can I impact this data? Okay, we should all have student outcome goals. What goals, what are my main goals for this school year on impacting students specifically? And then annual agreements, okay? The annual agreements are going to be where they sit down with you as their principal and they say, these are the priorities that I have for my comprehensive school counseling programs. And you'll say, well, these are some priorities that I have, all right, that are appropriate activities for school counselors. And let's figure out how we can make sure that we are aligned as we move into this next school year. Okay, and then school counselors explain the impact of adverse childhood experiences and trauma. They also demonstrate techniques to support all students who have experienced trauma. And then they get trauma-informed practices training every 3 years. Okay, this document also is meant to be a clarifying document for, again, for school administrators for how the school counselors should be utilized within the schools. And to ensure their own effectiveness, they're going to engage in those professional and a continuous process of professional goal setting, self-assessment, learning, and growth. All right, so you likely have heard about direct student services, and maybe you've also heard about indirect student services. Well, ASCA, the American School Counseling Association, states that 80% of counselors' time should be spent on direct and indirect student services, and we have that Senate Bill 8 says each school district and each public charter school shall employ at least one school counselor in each school, with the goal of the school counselor spending 60% or more of his or her time providing counseling and related services directly to students. All right, now our counselors should be spending the majority of their time working with the whole group. Okay, so what lessons can I provide that are going to focus on social emotional wellness, the academic support that you need, and then that career support that you need? All right, We should also be doing, of course, our individual and small group counseling within Tier 2, and then our crisis or intensive interventions within Tier 3. But of course, all of this work, all of our work should be connected to social emotional learning. And because it should all be connected to social emotional learning, I want to engage with you in a quick lesson about you and your personal journey, right? That's going to show you an example or a model of SEL. All right. So I hope that you're willing to use your chat box, right? These meetings are all about building community. Okay, so I want you to know that all of us experience cognitive distortions, and cognitive distortions, they're simply ways that our mind convinces us of something that isn't really true. These inaccurate thoughts are usually used to reinforce negative thinking or emotions. So we tell ourselves things that sound rational and accurate, but really only serve to keep us feeling bad about ourselves. All right, so for this next little part, I want you to name and claim. So as we go through defining cognitive distortions over the next 10 slides, place the terms that connect to you in the chat box. So if you're Kim, right, if you see a term that you're like, oh my gosh, I do that, just put the term in the chat box. It'll be by your name, and that's going to serve to show other people that are within this community on this call right now that we're not the only ones experiencing these things. All right, let's give this a try. So the first kind of cognitive distortion is all or nothing thinking, also referred to as black and white thinking or dichotomous thinking. So this is when we see things in only two categories. So they're either good or bad, black or white, with no shades of gray. And a common distortion that makes you think and therefore feel that if something is not all of what you want, then it's none of what you want. It's also thinking that you have to perform well on everything, perfectionism, or you've totally failed. All right, if you experience all or nothing thinking, will you please put that in the chat box? Just put all or nothing thinking in the chat box. All right, I can imagine that as a principal, you feel like you've got to be perfect with everybody. Okay, so I imagine that many of you feel this way or experiencing this. The second kind of cognitive distortion is emotional reasoning. It is believing that because you feel something, it must be true, even when there's no evidence other than the feeling. So, for example, I feel lonely, therefore no one likes me, or I feel afraid to go in an elevator, therefore elevators are dangerous places. If you experience emotional reasoning throughout your life, throughout your journey, throughout your career, please put that in the chat box. All right. I'm not seeing anything in the chat box yet, so I'm interested to see where we go from here. So overgeneralization. Taking one negative event or detail about a situation and making it a universal pattern that is a truth about your whole life, right? Man, I'm bad about this. So this person didn't want to hang out with me. No one ever wants to hang out with me. Or I messed up my chemistry experiment today. I never do anything right. So you can have this one thing happen and your whole life becomes, you know, you're a terrible person or a terrible principal or a terrible this or that because of this one thing. If you experience overgeneralization, put in the chat box, please. Labeling. Okay. Now I'm studying to become a principal right now, and I'm going to watch out for labeling. So putting a negative label on yourself or someone else so that you no longer see the person behind the label. When you lock someone in place like that, your understanding becomes so rigid that there's no wiggle room to see yourself or another person differently. So if you're doing this about yourself, you might say things like, man, I'm ugly, I'm dumb, I'm just not smart, I'm just not good, whatever. Or you can say this about somebody else, he or she is racist, you know, so you've created these labels. And again, it becomes really difficult for ourselves to overcome those labels along with other people. If you experience labeling in your life, please put that in the chat box. Do you fortune tell? Do you predict something is going to turn out in a negative way? This can become a pessimistic way of viewing the future, and it can impact your behavior, making the event you're fortune telling more likely to turn out badly. So an example, if I apply for this job, I know I won't get it. I was fortune telling a little bit before this presentation, and I had to get myself in the right mind. I had to do some deep breathing and mindfulness because I was like, man, I really want this to go well. And I was like, I don't know. So if you experience fortune telling, please put that in the chat box. See how we got this. All right, looks like, okay. All right, so mind reading. So mind reading is assuming that you know and understand what another person is thinking and typically being sure it reflects poorly on you. Assuming that you know and understand what another person is thinking and typically being sure it reflects poorly on you. So you could be speaking on a Zoom and see a colleague that looks like he or she isn't paying attention because they're looking and speaking to somebody else. He or she doesn't like me, doesn't support me, and thinks I'm not a valuable member of the team. If you experience mind reading, please put that in the chat box. All right. Thank you. Thanks, Bryson. Catastrophizing. Now, so many of us do this, okay? Where we take a problem or something negative and blow it out of proportion. My staff meeting or class didn't go nearly as well as I'd hoped. I'm the worst principal or teacher or counselor ever, right? So we take one thing that just didn't seem to go our way and we totally blow it out of proportion. If you catastrophize, put that in the chat box. Do you discount the positive? Taking something positive that happened and minimize it so that it doesn't count as a good thing or in your life or experience. It discounts any evidence against our negative view of ourselves or our situation. I used to be a special education teacher at Fairdale High School, and then I was a high school English teacher over at Louisville Male. And I could have 5 amazing class periods and then one that just didn't feel right, just didn't go very well. And I'd be like, today was terrible, today was awful, right? And what was happening was I was discounting the positive. I was forgetting that I had 5 amazing, incredible, profound class periods. And I let one kind of so-so one get to me and ruin my day. So if you discount the positive, please put that in the chat box. All right, last couple. Do you have a mental filter? Do you see only the negative instead of looking at all the positive or neutral aspects of an experience? You have many, so an example, you have many positive conversations in a day and one in which you say something embarrassing. You focus with total horror only on the embarrassing statement you made, forgetting all your other social interactions. So, you know, these are folks that might lay awake in bed and they're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I said that one thing. Again, you know, discounting the fact that you had all these other amazing conversations throughout the day. If you have a mental filter, please put that in the chat box. All right, and then personalization. This is when we make things about you when they aren't. This includes blaming yourself for what is beyond your control and also taking things personally when they are not intended to be harmful to you. So an example, this survey from parents or students or teachers showed a 55% satisfaction rate within the school culture. This low percentage is all my fault. And I can imagine that as a principal, you would feel that kind of stress and that kind of personalization, like it all you know, the buck stops with me and it's all on me. And that's just not true. You know, there's a lot that you're responsible for, probably way too much, to be honest with you. I don't have to tell you that, but we can't make everything about us. All right, in terms of things that don't go as well as we had hoped. All right, last one, imperatives. This is thinking in shoulds and musts, and the inverse, should not and must not. For example, I should be able to give presentations in class without feeling any anxiety. What's wrong with me? Of course, thinking this way, on top of feeling nervous, makes you even more nervous about speaking. So, do you experience imperatives? All right. So that was an example of social emotional learning. And for those of you that were able to participate, thank you. I am not taking it personal if you weren't, because I understand that you're trying to run a school right now, right? But I want you to know that it is nice. Hopefully you felt it is nice to know that I'm not the only one that experiences these things. And guess what? Your school counselor can do the exact same thing for your students. When they are able to get in the classroom and do tier 1 whole group lessons, they're able to normalize the things that your kiddos are going to go through. Right? When they're allowed to do small group counseling, when they're able to do those things, they're helping to normalize the way that kids in small groups feel. Right? And they're also able to create connectivity between students, just like we did as we built community just now. All right, so getting back to the framework, I'm going to finish up here, but school counselors can also include, they also include career opportunities, labor market trends, and global economics to help students develop immediate and long-range plans. So one of those domains was that career domain. Okay, and they help students cross-reference occupational career goals and individual assessment results to the ILP. Okay, we also create lesson plans identifying activities to be delivered, standards to be addressed, to whom activities will be delivered, and how they will be delivered, and how data will be evaluated to determine impact on student outcomes. So it is a new day for the Kentucky Individual Learning Plan. Our schools have so much more autonomy to create ILPs. And what we've done is we've created ILP playbooks. This is an example. All of these ILP playbooks are awesome because they're free lessons for your people. They all connect to social and emotional learning. They also connect to our essential skills, right? And we've got this for grades 5 through 12. So not just, this is just an example of the 9 through 12 one, but we've got all of this for grades 5 through 12. Okay, the ILP is required for kids in grades 6 through 12, but we think it's really important for kids in elementary schools to explore careers. So we started in grades 5. So all of this is here. We've also got an awesome Google Classroom with free lessons that your people can use as well. All right. Okay. I wanted to just give you a couple of things. First off, I'm from Louisville, so I had to put a picture of the University of Louisville Cardinals on the slide deck. Go Cards. But our principal used to do something amazing with our leadership teams. Every Monday morning, she would ask us to print our calendars for the week, right? And then circle the biggest priority on that calendar. And we would do a 10-minute huddle right after the first period bell rang. This 10-minute huddle would allow all school leadership team members, all of our school administrators, our principal, our APs, and our counselors to get together, huddle with those calendars and say, all right, on Thursday from 11 to 2, I'm going to be in classrooms doing this. And because we said that's the priority, that was protected time for us, right? So nobody could call us on our walkie-talkies because they knew we would be in classrooms doing our lessons. Okay, so huddling up, blocking off time, making sure that you're communicating the priorities that you have for the week is a really great tool to use as a school principal. All right. Also, again, we want data-driven school counselors. They should be tracking their time, and we've got different ways for them to do that. So here are just 2 quick examples. They can do that on a Google sheet like this, right? And then we've also got Jefferson County is doing something amazing. They've got a Google form that all of their school counselors fill out every single Friday that helps them track their time. Okay, when counselors aren't spending 60% of their time in direct student services, the principals are getting emails from the district saying, let's have a conversation. And it's not a punitive one. It's let's figure out why your counselors aren't spending their time doing the things that are nationally recommended, statewide recommended, and in law. And then let's figure out a plan for how they can get back to those things. All right. Thank you so much for your time today. If you have questions, please feel free to email me. I do a lot of presenting and a lot of professional development. So if you're interested in that, we can talk about presentations on equity. We can talk about presentations on school counseling. Also follow me on Twitter for some cool updates. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Damien. If you have any questions or comments for Damien, I do encourage you to unmute your mic or type those questions in the chat box. And we'll just take just about 30 seconds to see if you have any questions before we move on. Okay.
All right, Jenny, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. We appreciate you being here and sharing. Thank you. At this time, I would like to introduce Rob Akers. He's the Associate Commissioner in the Office of Educational Licensure and Effectiveness. And the guiding question for this part is, what input might you provide as decisions are being made regarding certified evaluations for 2020, 2021? So, Mr. Akers, I will turn it over to you. I will just stop sharing and you can talk to the group.
Thanks, Jenny. It's good to be with you all today. I hope your return of students and other preparations for that are going well. I know you've got lots and lots on your plate. With the recent passage of House Bill 208, the General Assembly basically redrafted and reactivated just about everything that was in Senate Bill 177 from last year that came out in March, that basically provided all the flexibility a local board would need to make any changes to the certified evaluation plan that they deem necessary. And so basically, every district may look very different. I'm aware of some districts who from the start have advocated for eliminating any and all evaluation and observation. There are others who have modified. And so basically it has become a complete local decision. And with that, though, the only caveat I'll throw out there is that nothing has changed in this bill in regards to tenure. But if a district decides even that non-tenured staff doesn't need to have a summative evaluation, as long as the district passes that, then that's completely okay in terms of the flexibility that's been granted to the districts. So at this time, I mean, I'm happy to take any input and provide any feedback that I can. But the bottom line is be working with your district leadership to advocate for the changes that you think need to occur. Now, that being said, if they stand pat on saying that we're going to have evaluation, it's going to look this way. If you haven't had the opportunity to listen to the P3 teams trainings or attend on how to evaluate and observe in the remote setting, that could be some really great guidance and tools to help you do that. So Jenny, at this time, if there are any questions, comments, concerns, just let me know.
Okay, yeah, we'll just pause here for a moment before we go on to announcements to see if you have any questions for Rob. All right, well, they will also have an opportunity, Rob, to respond on our feedback form. So if they think of some questions afterwards that they didn't think of right at this moment, then we'll be sure and share those with you.
Great, yeah, just let me know. We'll be happy to get a response. And if anyone wants to reach out individually, please just shoot me an email. I'll be happy to track down an answer for you.
All right, excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that information with the group. All right, we will go ahead. We're to the announcements part of our meeting. We just have 4 that we want to make sure that you know about. And Rob mentioned the Danielson Framework for Remote Teaching. We are on part 3, and we are providing that learning experience on March 24th. So if you want more information about that, would like to register for that event, there's plenty of time to do so. These links are all active on the slide deck, so you can go there to find out not only about part 3, but if you were unable to attend parts 1 or 2, there are video recordings and the slide decks and resource links that we provided around those sessions as well. So I encourage you to join us for part 3, join in on the discussions. We do use breakout groups and breakout spaces as well for the learning, especially around really digging deep into asynchronous and synchronous learning and what that effective teaching looks like in those 2 settings specifically. And we have some Kentucky examples to showcase as well. I also want to make sure that you're aware of the Commissioner's virtual tour that's coming up. Once again, this is an active link that will take you to the KDE page around the tour dates, and those are all virtual dates as well. And then I want to make sure that you are aware we already have posted for next year, starting in July, the initial certified evaluation training dates. So if you know of new principals in your district or new administrators who will be evaluating certified personnel for the first time, KDE is the only provider of that 2-day learning experience. We are offering that virtual again. We are using what we have learned around effective ways to model virtual teaching and learning. So we will use both synchronous and asynchronous learning times. And again, you can get all of that information once you click on this link. And then finally, I want to make you aware, you're the first group to hear about this opportunity for the Coach Approach Project's Cohort 2. We will be accepting applications, and the application is not online yet, but this link on this slide will take you to the page where that will be, and we are getting ready to soon publish the application for that. But what it will be is 8 days of cognitive coaching that we will be providing, and the location will be, and it is a face-to-face training, and it does happen at the Ohio Valley Educational Cooperative, OVEC, but it is for any leader in the state, any principal in the state. And again, more information will be coming your way about that, but I wanted to make sure that you knew where to find that on our web space in case you have some leaders in mind, or in case you are interested in participating in that 8-day learning event around cognitive coaching, with also some follow-up from our team and with Cohort 1, that you'll be connecting with those principals who participated in Cohort 1 of the 8 days of training. And it's not only principals, it's also our university principal prep providers who have participated and are providing many of the learning opportunities that connect with those 8 days of cognitive coaching. So we're excited about that. That's what's coming up. I want to honor your time. It looks like we're 4 minutes short of our closing time. So I want to make sure if you do have some questions or comments about today's meeting. Also, our next meeting date, and that will be the fourth quarter. It's the last one of the year, June 22nd. It's from 10 to 12 on that Eastern time, 9 to 11 Central time. And I hope to see you all here at that time. We'll have more information. Please, on the exit slip, you're also given the opportunity to provide what are some things you think that you want to hear about, that you'll want to hear about at that June 22nd meeting. Please put that information in there. And then also all along the way, moving up to that date, if you think of things, of course, you can always email me and let me know what you're thinking, because we want to provide the information that's timely, that's necessary, and that you would then share with your principal colleagues, not only in your district, but with any other statewide and regional groups that you have. So, regarding the feedback for today's meeting, the link is on the slide deck. And let's see, I'll post that, or Paul, if you wouldn't mind grabbing that link.
Did.
Thank you. Perfect. Of course you have. Is in the chat, and we encourage you to provide feedback for us around today's meeting and what you would like to see upcoming. We have about 11 members, I think, who are rotating off after this year as well, and we'll be taking time to honor you at that June 22nd date as well. So if there are questions, please unmute your mic or post those questions in the chat. If not, do I have a motion to adjourn?
This is Toya. I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Thank you. How about a second?
This is Kim Rice. I second it.
Thank you, Kim. And you'll signify that you're all in favor by, when you are ready, you can log off of this meeting. Thank you so much for giving your time, and let us know how we might continue to support and serve you in your leadership journey. Thanks for being here.
Jenny, who's leaving? Are we all leaving?
There's a large group. Yes, I can't name. I have the list, but I can't name everybody off one by one. But so it's a 3-year commitment, and I think some, because of the way timing has worked out, some have been more than 3 years at this time. But those of you who have fulfilled your 3-year commitment to serve, we just thank you so much. And on the website, there's a link if you know of people who you think might want to be a part of this group, then there is a link to provide an application, if you will, on KDE's website. If you go to KDE, as a matter of fact, in our follow-up email, I'll provide that link to you guys. But if you go to KDE and then go to our PrAC page on KDE's site, there is information about how to become a member of this group.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
I think
Thank you.
I think I'm that 3-year. I think.
Yeah, I think so too.
I am. Yeah. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Hope to see you in June.
Yes. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you all for joining us.
Should we stop recording now?
Yes, please.